distinguished representatives and guests, good morning and welcome to your virtual conference space. Please allow me a couple of minutes of your time to give you a quick refresh. Perfect. So once again, I will steal a couple of minutes of your time to give you a quick refresh of the main Zoom features to make sure that your meeting runs as smoothly as possible. So without further ado, our Zoom meeting guidelines, I will be very quick. So first of all, I kindly remind all presenters to use headset or earphones with integrated microphones whenever possible. Headset or earphones are always recommended in virtual meetings to make sure your message is heard clearly by all attendees and of course by your interpreters that are now working behind the scenes. We recommend all participants to use the Zoom desktop app and update their app to the latest version, especially if they are experiencing any technical issues. The most important thing would be your microphone. On Zoom, the microphone is located in the bottom left corner of your screen. Please click on the little arrow that you find next to the icon on the right of the microphone to check or change your settings to make sure your device, that is the microphone you will be using for the meeting, is correctly recognized and picked up by Zoom. Raise hand. During any interactive session, your meeting coordinator or moderators will invite you to take the floor and contribute. Please do so by clicking on the little hand that is found in the bottom center of your screen to signal that you are ready and willing to take the floor. Interpretation. For today's meeting, we have simultaneous interpreting available from and into English, French, and Spanish. A team of professional conference interpreters is ready behind the scenes, and interpretation will start as soon as your session officially kicks off. Please wait until the start of the meeting to select your preferred language channel. Technical support for all technical glitches, do not hesitate to send us a message anytime directly via the meeting chat. Your main support contacts today are Nathan for interpretation support and me, but all technical operators are easy to find. So just type support in the participant list and you'll quickly find us. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us anytime. On behalf of the Master Voice support team, thank you so much for your attention. We wish you all a very pleasant meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice, for the technical support. Good morning, good afternoon, probably good evening for some. My name is Reiko Matsuyama. I'm with the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund Fund Management Unit. Welcome to our second annual consultative forum. I would like to, without further ado, I actually would like to hand over to Director General Antonio Vitorino. He is the chair of our Fund Steering Committee and also the coordinator of the UN Network on Migration. Over to you, Director General. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good morning to all of you. I would like to warmly welcome you to this second consultative forum of the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund, which is being convened as part of the annual meeting of the UN Network on Migration. The purpose of this forum is twofold. First, we want to provide an update on the status of the fund, its achievements to date, and the challenges faced. You will hear not only from myself, but also from our distinguished steering committee members representing donors, UN agencies, and stakeholders, as well as country-level partners who are implementing joint programs. We are also very much pleased to have with us the UNDP Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office, who will provide closing remarks. Second objective, we look forward to hearing from you, member states, stakeholders, and UN colleagues. Your comments, your concerns and suggestions will be much appreciated, and I will make sure to take your inputs to our steering committee meeting that is going to be held next Tuesday, 14th of December. As you know, launched in 2019, the fund is a unique vehicle that brings the Global Compact to life and implement joint action. It finances programs that are the product of collaborative work by members of the UN Network on Migration with government partners, both national and local, as well as stakeholders, including those representing migrants and migration-affected communities. As such, each of these programs is a testament to the commitment of the UN system to work better together, fully aligned with the overall reforms of the UN development system. As of today, thanks to the general support of 12 member states, Germany, the United Kingdom, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, France, Portugal, Mexico, the Philippines, Thailand, Cyprus, and Turkey, 9 joint programs are being implemented worldwide, and a few more may be launched before the end of the current year. In line with the 360-degree approach, the funded programs cover all thematic areas of the fund and all continents. However, these 9 joint programs only scratch the surface, as the demand for the fund remains very strong and definitely outweighs the supply. To date, the fund has received 113 concept notes for over 70 different countries. In addition to those who have been funded, 32 of these joint program ideas have been positively assessed by the steering committee and constitute what we call the Migration MPTF pipeline. Many amongst the Migration MPTF donors, Germany, the United Kingdom, Norway, Sweden, France, and Mexico, have renewed their commitments and made a second and sometimes even a third contribution in 2021. While we can count on their continued support, it is crucial for the fund to broaden its donor base and see more member states join and contribute to reaching the total capitalization target of $70 million by the first International Migration Review Forum set by the steering committee. To build momentum for the review of the implementation of the Global Compact and foster tangible contributions to its implementation, the UN Migration Network will soon launch a pledging campaign. A consolidated list of all pledges by member states and stakeholders will be presented at the IMRF. While pledges do not need to be financial and can take many forms, contributions to the Migration MPTF will be amongst the menu of options to demonstrate concrete commitment to supporting the Global Compact implementation. As such, the pledging campaign will constitute a powerful tool to support Migration MPTF fundraising efforts. I would now like to share with you, hot off the press, a short video introducing the fund. This is available in English, French, and Spanish, but in the interest of time, allow me just to show you the English version. Well, let's see if it comes out.
To improve the lives of migrants and their communities, the Global Compact for Migration calls for the creation of a fund to help states achieve safe, orderly, and regular migration. To this end, the UN Network on Migration established the Trust Fund, governed by a steering committee comprising states, donors, the UN, and stakeholders, pooling expertise to ensure we deliver as one. The fund supports projects in all regions, tackling issues such as sexual violence, the exploitation of women migrants, and human trafficking. while also combating xenophobia, vulnerabilities of families dependent on remittances, and drivers linked to climate change. However, it could do so much more to change the lives of migrants everywhere. An additional $50 million could launch many more programs. As we head towards the first global review of the Compact, support for this key initiative is more crucial than ever. Together, let's make migration work for all.
Thank you for your attention. Now, allow me to introduce the topics of today's forum. As you saw from the video, the Migration MTPF is multifaced by nature as it supports all 23 objectives of the Global Compact and aligns with all the 10 guiding principles. Today, through short briefings by both steering committee members and partners implementing joint programs on the ground, we want to illustrate this diversity and the relevance of its support from three key angles: climate change, engagement with local authorities, and gender responsiveness. Climate change and environmental degradation are profoundly shifting contemporary migration patterns, and predictions indicate that the dynamics will become ever more challenging. Millions are being displaced in the context of disasters and environmental degradation, and the numbers are increasing at an alarming rate. Aligned with the Paris Agreement and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Global Compact calls upon member states to minimize the adverse drivers and the structural factors that compel people to leave their countries of origin, Objective 2 of the Global Compact. The IGAD region joint program, funded by the Migration MPTF, addresses migration in the context of climate change and provides an interesting example on how the fund can contribute to answering this challenge. I would also like to point out that a Pacific region joint program that promotes safe and fair migration as a climate resilience strategy is also amongst the priority joint programs identified by the steering committee within the pipeline. In most countries, national governments are mandated with managing migration policies and frameworks. However, it is at the local level that the reality of migration plays out and affects people's lives, whether they are immigrants arriving or in transit, returnees, families left behind, or impacted communities. While migration can be a strong force for innovation and sustainable development, it can also require significant effort and resources to ensure integration, social inclusion, protection of rights, equal access to basic services, and last but not least, economic opportunities. Being the first interlocutors, local authorities are not mere implementing partners of migration policies, but they are active contributors with the experience and ability to strengthen effective migration governance. The GCM acknowledges the critical role of local authorities and specifically mentions the need for their involvement in more than half of its 23 objectives. Most of the 9 joint programs currently being implemented have elements of local engagement, and a number of them implement closely with local authorities and communities to reduce vulnerabilities of families that are adversely affected by migration, for instance, in Tajikistan, address irregular migration and strengthen border communities in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, and promote socio-economic integration of migrants. via a unique city-level South-South cooperation initiative in Chile and Mexico, and strengthen local responses to xenophobia and promote social inclusion among migrants and host communities in South Africa. In line with the GCM guiding principle, the Migration MPTF seeks to ensure that the majority of its funding is allocated to joint programs that make significant contributions to gender equality and women's empowerment. The fund utilizes a gender marker, tracking the fund's performance in this area and providing guidance for all partners developing or implementing joint programs. When it meets next week, the steering committee will, among others, review the fund's strategic priorities. The three themes to be explored further today: climate change, engagement with local authorities, and gender responsiveness being, of course, amongst them. I'll make sure to take your inputs of today's discussion to the steering committee meeting next week. While I certainly do not want to preempt the outcome of our discussions, I think I can safely say that we will maintain a very strong commitment to the 360-degree approach, as well as alignment to the GCM principles of all of government, all of society, and above all, people-centered approaches. With your support and collaboration, I am truly confident that the fund will grow and continue to provide critical support to member states, to UN partners and stakeholders in realizing the vision of the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. So, without further ado, let's turn now to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General, for that inspiring opening statement. So, as the Director General had introduced, we will be illustrating our work, the fund's work, from three different approaches or angles today: climate change, engagement with local authorities, and gender responsiveness. We will have a rich group of speakers, two per topic, and we will invite the speakers to take the floor for each topic. In the interest of time, we will only open the floor for questions and answers after all three topics have been presented. Please indicate your name and organization in the chat function if you would like to take the floor during the Q&A session. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce the first two speakers under the climate change topic. The first speaker is Dr. Elke Lubel. She is the Commissioner for Refugee Policy and Director of Displacement and Migration, Crisis Prevention and Management from the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. Germany sits on our steering committee representing the donor constituency. The second speaker for the climate change topic will be Mr. Atli Sudbel, Head of the Secretariat for Platform on Disaster Displacement, PDD. He will represent one of our regional joint programs that the coordinator just mentioned, addressing the drivers of and facilitating safe, orderly, and regular migration in the context of disasters and climate change in the IGAD region in East Africa. Thank you for the speakers. Over to you, Dr. Elke.
Thank you so much, dear Mr. Vitorino, dear member states representatives, dear participants in this panel and this forum. Thank you very much for having the opportunity to share with you the perspective of German development policy on the implementation of the GCM with a specific focus on climate-induced migration. Thank you so much, and I think it's very important to talk about our guiding principles, as Mr. Vitorino already started. The German approach is the comprehensive 360-degree approach already mentioned by him, based on human rights and gender sensitivity. And why do I mention this, and why do I think it's important to mention it again and again? is because I'm the Commissioner for Refugee Policy of the BMZ, the German ministry, but I often find that the discussion only has a very one-dimensional view. It's only return, it's only labor migration, it's only short-term. So I think it's much more like a puzzle we are talking about, where different stakeholders and approaches shape the whole picture. And I think this is what the MPTF stands for, showing a picture of what we have to do in the future and what we are already doing. Our German approach, if I talk about 360-degree, as I mentioned, aims at whole government, whole of society perspective, integrating civil society organizations and migrant representatives, very important. We work towards minimizing the root causes of displacement. We support refugees, IDPs, and migrants, and very important for us as developers, also always host communities. We support multi-year, multi-sectors. We promote regular migration pathways, voluntary return, and sustainable reintegration. I could go on with remittances and all that. So it's a bunch of 360-degree, and it's very important if we look at root causes that climate-induced migration is a cross-cutting issue which we have to have a closer look on. Climate change, as Mr. Vittorini already mentioned, is one major root cause for conflicts and instability, and that has, as a result, forced displacement. So, as an example, I would like to state what are we very concretely doing. We work with UNHCR, for example, in the energy sector by supplying refugee camps with clean energy, which is more sustainable and more cost efficient. So we combine the humanitarian development peace nexus also in the issue of migration and climate change migration. Mr. Vittorino, we applaud IOM for the new strategy on migration, environment, and climate change. It is setting an excellent example on the need for bridging the gaps through nexus approaches in climate policy. I think this was one of the most important issues when we started with the network. We are pleased to see stronger engagement of the UN network on migration in this regards, and we welcome the strong statement of the network ahead of the COP26 in Glasgow. I think it's very important to frame that. Germany's strategy in the field is to support those who are particularly vulnerable and exposed to the impacts of climate change. An important aspect of our engagement is strengthening gender equality and empowering persons in fragile and displacement contexts, which are tremendous. We are waiting for the next fragility report of the OECD, but the last one already showed us what is coming ahead. So I think we welcome this for the recent decision of the MPTF steering committee to fund a project with a strong regional focus on climate change, which was already mentioned, which is will take place in the IGAD region. Mr. Vittorino mentioned it. We strongly advocated for this project and contributed to the funding. Climate change does not respect borders, and so specific answers have to be found. They have to be regional. They have to be local. They have to connect local communities to each other, what was already mentioned also. IGAD and the free movement protocol in the IGAD region is a big success. So I'm very happy that we're going to implement this program. The trust fund has been set up to bring the UN family together in joint and coherent approaches to support member states in their efforts to implement the GCM. I remember being in Marrakesh in 2018 when Louis Arbour was fighting very strong for this UN family approach. And so today we see the strength in the fund, and it lies from my point of view, in its multi-stakeholder character. In the Nexus approach, bringing humanitarian, peace, and development agencies together. I really appreciate that. Mr. Vittorino, you know I'm fighting for that for years. And it brings the opportunity to develop innovative approaches which can be reproduced in other regions or contexts. That is why I really appreciate the EGAT project we are now implementing. So close cooperation with partner countries and organizations at local level is crucial. Ownership and sustainable results are very important. So I would like to thank my co-panelist, Mr. Solberg. He will talk also today for the facilitation role of the platform on disaster displacement to develop the project with EGAT in the EGAT region by bringing together all relevant stakeholders. Thank you very much. It proves a catalyst role PDD can play in developing and implementing practical approaches on the ground. And to close, because I know I have 7 minutes, nevertheless, I want to state that climate change is so important and it will continue to shape migration and displacement patterns worldwide. We see 30 million additional IDPs as results of natural disasters. Look at South Sudan right now, we have a flood there. Look at Afghanistan, it's not only crisis, it's 4 years of drought, which bring 24 million people in Afghanistan to lose their base for nutrition. We need to strengthen international cooperation on this topic and create incentives for joint approaches for prevention, disaster risk reduction. Important issues in this regard, and this to close, remain from my point of view: communication, data, and forecasting. We are confident that the Global Data Institute in Berlin will further enhance abilities to forecast disaster and their impact on mobility and migration. And I think we have to find additional ways to inform policy shapers about new data and what is this all about. We are happy to support the MPTF, to work jointly in the innovative implementation. And Germany has announced another contribution to the fund with a volume of €5 million last week at the EUM Council. So it's about fundraising, but it's not only about money. As you already mentioned, Mr. Vittorino, in the run-up to the next first Migration Review Forum of GCM next year, I would really like to encourage other member states support the MPTF and to leverage the MPTF as a powerful instrument for change. The next step we have to take is to show the evidence. So let's start a dialogue on how we can showcase the impact of the MPTF at the next Migration Review Forum. I think that would be a good step to go. Together with our partners, Germany stands ready to step up our efforts to implement the GCM and to support our partners in their efforts. And I thank all of you for joining this, this important trust fund, and I look forward to our discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Alke. Atle, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Dear Director General, dear Dr. Löbel, distinguished participants, dear colleagues. My name is Atle Solberg, and I'm head of the Secretariat of the Platform on Disaster Displacement, PDD, and I'm joining you from Geneva, Switzerland. It is my pleasure to take the floor to share the experience from the joint program on addressing drivers and facilitating safe, orderly and regular migration in the context of disasters and climate change in the EGAT region. The joint program was launched on 25th of May 2021 as a partnership between the International Organization for Migration, the International Labour Organization, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the Platform on Disaster Displacement, which is hosted by the United Nations Office for Project Services, UNOPS, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, EGAT Secretariat, and the EGAT Climate Prediction and Application Center. The scope of the joint program is aligned with the vision and guiding principle of the Global Compact for Migration, with the aim to help facilitate pathway for regular migration in the EGAT region and to minimize displacement risk in the context of the adverse effect of climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters linked to natural hazards. The joint program is implemented through 4 pillars of action, which address gaps regarding 1, data and knowledge, 2, national and regional policy frameworks, 3, disaster and disaster displacement preparedness, 4, and regular migration pathways. I will use this brief intervention to highlight 3 key challenges the joint program seeks to address and how program partners have responded to those challenges over the first month and in the first year of implementation of the project. First, the needs and gaps identified in the IGAD region in relation to migration, disaster, and climate change are significant. The region is considered one of the most vulnerable to climate variability and change. It faces a wide range of natural hazards, most commonly severe droughts and floods that contribute to displacement and other forms of human mobility. Approximately 3 million new displacement associated with climate-related disasters were recorded in 7 countries of the IGAD region in 2020 alone. To address these challenges, we need a deeper understanding of this complex risk landscape in the IGAD region, including on how to respond to and manage emerging drivers of migration and displacement. To that end, the joint program has already begun to provide and support governments in the IGAD region with enhanced access to data and evidence on disaster risk and disaster displacement risk, and information on other forms of human mobility. Ongoing data collection on floods and cyclones in the region will feed into the development of disaster displacement risk models. And the first workshop of expert and national level stakeholders has highlighted how such model can be applied to guide policy and operational decision-making in this area. The second area that the joint program seeks to address as a challenge is on migration and displacement in the context of climate change and disaster as a complex and cross-cutting issue. It requires stakeholders working on areas such as climate change action, disaster risk reduction, human mobility, humanitarian assistance and protection, and labor mobility to come together and work towards integrated approaches to avert and minimize displacement on one side, according to Objective 2 of the Compact, while ensuring safe, orderly, and regular migration on the other, very much reflected in Objective 5 of the Compact. Supporting development of comprehensive policy frameworks and integrated action requires strong coordination and commitment to work across policy and action areas. The joint program is positioned to facilitate such efforts. The MPTF is a multi-partner mechanism of the Global Compact for Migration, and there is strong collaboration among program partners, including through ongoing exchanges, monthly meetings at technical level, and workshops convening a range of different stakeholders. An important priority has been to share expertise and capacity among a broad range of stakeholders, including IGAD as a regional organization and its member states, and ICPAC as a specialized IGAD institution. Applying the learning from such efforts will support the objectives of the joint program to enhance availability and flexibility of pathway for regular migration and to minimize displacement risk in the context of the adverse effect of climate change and disaster. The third area is related to the impact of climate change and droughts on access to livelihoods. The impacts of climate change, like droughts or floods, are affecting access to livelihood and, by extension, the ability to cover basic needs and sometimes generating humanitarian needs. This can drive the decision to migrate, among other factors. Especially within the IGAD region, where a large share of the population is highly dependent on natural resources, the effect of climate change on livelihood is a critical factor in migration decisions and part of the complex risk landscape I have outlined above. To this end, the joint program seeks to improve access for migrants and affected communities to sustainable livelihood and green job opportunities, and to improve communities' resilience to climate change. Early on in the joint program, a focus has been to bring together affected communities with local and national level stakeholders, in line with the whole of government and whole of society approach of the Global Compact for Migration. The program will, for example, conduct a pilot assessment on how to support and development of local labor market in climate change and disaster-prone areas, particularly as regards to youth and women employment. And it has already commenced a study on how to better include human mobility in the green economy policies in the region. To conclude, the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund and the programs it supports are key components of the capacity building mechanism envisaged by the Global Compact for Migration. We hope to see a scale up of its potential to support governments in realizing their commitments related to migration and displacement in disaster and climate change context, and that we can replicate the experience from the IGAD region in other regions. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. We look forward to continuing these efforts and to sharing further lessons learned from the joint program, especially as we look towards the International Migration Review Forum in 2022. I thank you.
Thank you, speakers, for that amazing introduction to the topics and also the introduction to the joint program. I note that both speakers had mentioned the importance of addressing climate change, climate-induced migration as a cross-cutting issue and aligning to GCM 360-degree approach, whole of government, whole of society, people-centered. It is very important that we see climate change, which may drive migration, but also provide answers. And both speakers also spoke to that. So thank you very much. Now, without further ado, I would like to go on to the next two speakers. Thank you for the previous two speakers. The next two speakers will speak on the topic of engagement with local authorities. The first speaker is Minister Erica Martinez-Vivano. She's the Charge d'Affaires of the Permanent Mission of Mexico in Geneva. And as mentioned, Mexico sits in our steering committee as a donor representative. The second speaker will be Ms. Victoria Zanusa. She is the Executive Director of the Mayor's Migration Council, who also sits on our steering committee representing the stakeholder constituency. So over to you, Minister Erica. And just to note that the intervention will be in Spanish. So if you need interpretation, please press the button on the right-hand side. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora moderadora.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, Director General Antonio Vitorina. Colleagues, I'm pleased to be with you all here today. First, we'd like to express our severe regrets for all of the victims of the accident that took place in Chiapas in Mexico. And there were Central American migrants that lost their lives there, unfortunately. And so we're trying to work to find out the origin of these victims, and we're going to basically take the necessary measures. And for Mexico, it's a real honor to participate in this forum as a member of the exec committee of the forum. We are also donors to this mechanism. We're also beneficiaries of one of the 9 programs that have been funded. Since its setting up in '97, we have been convinced that this multi-stakeholder fund is unique, and it's going to help us really implement the Global Compact. As we know, migration is a very complex topic. It's very difficult to address, and it's only with a 360-degree approach in collaboration with all actors and a genuine international cooperation that we can really get to its real objectives, which is to create an orderly, secure and regular migration with benefits for everything. And that's the posture that the fund works towards. And so the 103 initiatives that we spoke about is a testament to everything that's gone on since it was established. In June of last year, we were invited to form part of this directive board, and we were able to really make sure that these initiatives would cover the totality of the global territories and make sure that all actors were involved with tangible results in line with the 2030, the Agenda 2030. And we're going to be able to also extend our current donor list, and we're going to say that Mexico is going to make another donation this year, and we therefore invite other countries to do the same, to contribute so as to allow the fund to support more projects. We would like to make sure that this initiative, which is being carried out together with the Chilean government, looks to facilitate migrants' economic inclusion in Santiago de Chile and Mexico DF, Mexico City. This is because migration is a phenomenon that we know takes place principally in cities, and the pandemic and the enormous inequalities that migrants are faced with, and also the risks that they're exposed to when there's no access without any discrimination to members of a certain society, to all accesses and key needs. And we know that the pandemic severely put this under stress. We had to rely on migrants to support our services and to take care of our sick and poorly, and also to give out food. And we hope that together with the OIT, the UNHCR and others, we're going to be able to empower migrants furthermore as agents for change. The project also has good practice exchange component and integration policies between Mexican and Chilean under a South-South cooperation mechanism. And I would like to invite other members of the forum to equally take part in this discussion, and I hope that we are able to continue sharing best practices both with origin, destination and transit countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Victoria Zanussi, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Reiko, and Director General Vittorino, distinguished colleagues. It's an honor to be here this morning, very early here in New York City, and represent. Yes, I love the MPTF, so I couldn't miss it, and represent my constituency of mayors and local governments. For those of you who are not familiar with the Mayors Migration Council, or the MMC for our friends, we are a mayor-led organization that helps cities influence responses to migration and displacement, often at the nexus with pressing global challenges, whether that's pandemics or the climate crisis and everything in between. We exist for one simple reason. When people move to or within nations, they often go to cities. And of course, it is national governments who deal with the questions of borders, visas, citizenship, and the like, but it's really at the city level that one must address the immediate needs of existence, whether that's shelter, food, healthcare, schools, and jobs. And it's at the city level that newcomers and receiving communities alike experience and more often than not build social cohesion and social inclusion. So this is why we were actually formed and launched at the margins of the Global Conference for the Adoption of the GCM. And during the negotiations of the compact, our founding mayors worked really hard to achieve two things. First, ensure that the final text of the compact acknowledged the critical role that local governments play in making the GCM a reality. And second, advocate for local governments to be included in all GCM follow-up and review processes, including the upcoming IMRF, where I hope that member states will bring mayors and local officials as part of their delegations as experts to tap into, or grant access in other ways, and accreditation in other ways. As an inaugural member of the MPTF steering committee, these past 2 years, I worked to ensure that the whole of government approach, the central tenet of the GCM, is actualized in the fund operations and selected programs. And I have to say that Philippe, Reiko, and the MPTF team really delivered on this promise. Of the 9 joint programs currently supported by the fund, almost half of them directly engage with local authorities and communities, either in the design of the project or in the implementation, or both. The Chile-Mexico program just described by Minister Martinez Evano is a perfect demonstration of the value of working hand in hand with municipal governments in both the design and the implementation of the project. I will repeat certain things that Director General Vittorino said, but I really think that this project is innovative for 2 reasons. First, it promotes horizontal coordination, south-to-south cooperation between 2 countries through its two major cities. But then it also promotes vertical integration between these two cities and international agencies that have a lot of experience delivering livelihood and job training programs. ILO, UNHCR, and IOM, which are great partners, and I know that they're great advocates for city access and inclusion. What is transformative about this project is also that it builds sustainability. It's not just about bringing tools and resources to cities and then leave, but it's about building their capacity so they can deliver it on their own in the future as their urban migrant populations keep increasing. I'm particularly close to this project because it was the first one that was adopted, so it has a special place in my heart, and we were very happy to participate in the event launch of the project. But there are many others in the pipeline and others that are currently being funded. Take the Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone project, which engages local governments to strengthen social cohesion across borders, or the project of the Philippines, which works with local governments units to facilitate safe return of overseas Filipino workers. And as much as I'm excited about these programs currently funded by the MPTF, I'm equally, if not more, excited about those that are in the pipeline and that remain unfunded, that still need to find a home. Take El Salvador, which would work with 3 of the top 10 Salvadorian municipalities to integrate returnees or people in transit into urban society. Or the Peru project, which would address the needs of Venezuelan migrants and receiving communities in the district of San Juan de Lugarancho. Pardon my Italian pronunciation. So as we all drive to the IMRF, all with our own expectations, our own dreams for this forum, our own agenda, I really encourage more member states to come forward with contributions so these projects can receive funding and find a home. I really think that by pushing applicant UN agencies to partner with local governments, Director General Vittorino Philippe and the whole fund management unit are really setting a great precedent and frankly, model behavior for others to follow. And I hope that member states will follow this transformative vision across other international funding and financing mechanisms out there. For example, we were involved a bit in the high-level panel on IDPs, and I know that a key recommendation is to create this global fund for internally displaced people. I really think this fund would have a lot to learn from the MPTF operations and structure. Or even, and I know this is more of an ambitious dream, but UNFCCC Green Climate Fund, it could also benefit from a more whole of government approach. This model behavior goes both ways. It's not just about cities influencing international funds, it's also about international funds and agencies inspiring cities and city level networks. By working closely with the team, I myself was inspired to create early this year a fund, the Global Cities Fund, which is our own instrument to direct international resources, both funding and technical, to city governments implemented in partnership with IOM and other UN agencies, because it's never good to reinvent the wheel. While the inaugural chapter of this fund has been focused on inclusive pandemic response, helping cities provide for their migrant and refugee populations in the face of COVID, we just launched at COP26 a chapter that is focused on climate migration in African cities, which I think really links well with the emerging MPTF priorities that Dr. Lobel and my friends and Atle at PDD spoke about earlier. To add a layer to what they said, all of these climate-related movements have 3 characteristics. They mainly are internal, they're short distance, and they're normally from rural areas to urban areas. So we worked with the researchers from the World Bank Groundswell, that also worked on the Groundswell report that is often cited by people talking about climate migration. And even if our research is not published yet, we localized their data in Mexico and Central America, and we found that cities like Mexico City could grow by 10 million more people for climate-related reasons by 2050 if not concrete action on climate and development is done. So it's important to address root causes, but I also think it would be smart to invest in cities within origin countries who are already, and will continue to receive the majority of climate migrants. And the Global Cities Fund is definitely a way to do that. I'll close because I know that I'm over time by saying that people say that it takes a village to raise a child. I say it takes cities to deliver on the GCM. So let's make that happen, and let's do it together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think that would be our new logo. It takes a city to implement the GCM. Absolutely. I think the importance of the 360-degree whole of government, whole of society has been really emphasized by both speakers, collaboration, coordination at the city level with local authorities, service providers, civil society, migrants and families and the communities that are affected is extremely important. And the whole idea of the horizontal and also the vertical coordination, I think is extremely important. And thank you so much for outlining those points. Next, last, but absolutely not least, is our speakers who will speak on gender responsiveness. So we have two speakers again. The first speaker is Ms. Monica Ferrer, who is the director of the Geneva office for the United Nations Populations Fund, UNFPA. And she is also sitting, UNFPA also sits, a recent addition to our steering committee membership as a UN Network and Migration Executive Committee representation. And the last speaker, who I'm really looking forward to, is Ms. Susan Oppler, who is the director of the Class F of the Policy Center and Training Institute. They are actually our implementing partner for our Philippines joint program looking at ethical recruitment and also return reintegration. So I will hand it over to Monica first and then Susan Oppler. Thank you.
Just a technical issue. Oh, I'm unmuted. Thank you so much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you, Reiko. Let me say, let me start by greeting the Director General, Antonio Vitorino, and all the people who've joined us today, and a special hello to my fellow panelists. And let me start by saying that today is Human Rights Day. And all migration policies need to have a human rights approach and a gender lens and a gender sensitive approach, which brings us here today. So I couldn't think of a better day to discuss this. So let's join our voices and say out and say loud and clear, migrants' rights are human rights, and also women's rights are human rights. And let me start by bringing my executive director to the conversation. And a couple of weeks ago, she actually said that protecting the rights of migrants, especially women and girls, is essential. Human rights are universal and thus apply to everyone, whether they are in their home countries, a host country, or somewhere in between. We also heard a lot about data already today, and we know that numbers matter. They represent the people who matter, and the more mobile a person is, the more likely is for them to go uncounted. And this is something that we really want to highlight, the need for disaggregated data, because only disaggregated data, will allow us to paint a fair portrait of the role of women and the numbers of women in migration, and therefore also highlighting the need to have a more gender responsive policies. As we all know, almost half of the migrants are women and girls, and most of them are of reproductive age. In some countries, what we know is that about 70 or 80% of migrant women are of reproductive age. And one of the most significant changes in migration patterns in the last half a century is that more women are migrating on their own or as heads of their households than ever before. So women and girls also are also a significant proportion of economic migrants. And if we want, we can see here a key opportunity for their economic independence and empowerment. For many, especially for youth, women and girls, migration can be a positive learning experience that can enhance livelihoods, autonomy, and empowerment. Also, data shows us that women send home a higher proportion of their earnings than men. So there's ample evidence of the economic impact and of the economic role of female migrants. Also, we know that female migrants, they face major risks, including sexual exploitation, trafficking, and violence. Since women migrants frequently end up in low status, low wage production and service jobs, and they often work in gender segregated and unregulated sectors of the economy, they are exposed to a much higher risk of exploitation, violence, and abuse. We know that women migrants are particularly vulnerable to human trafficking for the purposes of sex exploitation, and also that trafficked women are exposed to sexual violence and sexually transmitted infections, including HIV, yet they have little access to medical or legal services. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, women and girls account for 71% of all human trafficking victims, and nearly half of the women and girls on the move experience abuses and violations of their rights during their journeys. So we know that women face overlapping discriminations as women and as migrants. Women can suffer doubly from these attitudes, experiencing not only discrimination based on their migration status, but also based on their gender. Compared to men, women have fewer opportunities for legal migration and are more vulnerable to violence and exploitation, and their needs for healthcare and other services are less likely to be met. Also, I would like to bring to you, I know that you are very cognizant of this, but women do not stop getting pregnant when they are on the move. Significant numbers of female migrants are likely to be pregnant or to become pregnant while they are on the move. While traveling or in the chaos of displacement, women may lose access to sexual and reproductive health care, including family planning, antenatal services, and safe childbirth care. The lack of these services can be deadly. In fact, it is considered one of the leading causes of death, disease, and disability among displaced women and girls of childbearing age. Even so, migration may be a pregnant woman's best option in a crisis setting, especially if insecurity or collapsing health systems threaten her life at home. We work with governments, and many of our partners here today work with us and with governments to uphold migrants' rights to access to sexual and reproductive health care, including deploying mobile health clinics to displacement camps and refugee communities, but much more needs to be done to increase access to the services. We also know that COVID had a disproportionate impact on women and on people who are already in vulnerable situations. And of course, migrant women face overlapping discriminations and vulnerabilities in this context. What we need to do, and there's a whole set of policy recommendations, action-oriented recommendations, is to support research and policy-oriented studies and assist governments in their capacity to collect statistics, including gender-specific data. We need to advocate for addressing the special concerns of women and young migrants, including the elimination of discrimination, abuse, and trafficking. And we need to provide reproductive health services and counseling for victims of trafficking, and providing technical assistance, training, and support to governments and other agencies to help combat a problem. We have a huge list of recommendations that I can share with those of you interested, but for the sake of time, I won't go through them, but it really is focused on adopting a gender lens and to consider the safety and well-being of female migrants at the core of our actions. And this really requires many actions, such as ensuring availability of no-cost legal services for female migrants, facilitate access to healthcare for female migrants, where possible, even support mobile healthcare services to reach isolated and/or undocumented migrants, and ensure that these services include treatment for injuries suffered from physical violence and for clinical management of rape. And this is why UNFPA is proudly a new member of the steering committee of the fund, because we think the fund can leverage all this work and all these policies that have already identified. It can raise the audience, it can raise the partners, and also we wish to highlight and celebrate the fact that the fund has adopted a gender marker to track alignment with the GCM gender sensitive guiding principle. We know that the commitment of the fund towards addressing gender issues is also illustrated by the fact that when women was appointed amongst the original members of the fund, and when rotating out, we, UNFPA, replaced what we would call a strong voice for gender programming. And also, DG Vitorino, allow me to congratulate the fund, because all 9 joint programs currently underway, they contribute significantly to gender equality and women's empowerment, Gender Mark B, and one amongst them, the Tajikistan joint program, I believe, focusing on families left behind, as GEWW as the primary objective, therefore gender marker A. So let me finish again with a quote from my executive director, to say that we remain committed and we want to mobilize the rest of the international community, but we remain committed to being at the forefront of efforts to protect the rights of migrants and all people, and to ensure that they have access to sexual and reproductive health services they need and can live in dignity and safety, free from violation and discrimination. And again, a happy International Human Rights Day to all of you. Thank you. Thank you, Reiko.
Thank you very much for the comprehensive intervention. Now, if I may turn to Ms. Susan Oakley.
Thank you, Reiko. I hope you can hear me well. Good evening from Manila, Philippines. And it's really a pleasure for this humble NGO worker to be invited to speak before all of you. I thank Director General Vitorino and all the MPTF officials and partners, my fellow panelists, for this opportunity. Let me describe where I'm from. In the Philippines, you know, nearly every household has a migrant worker or a member living and working abroad. In my family alone, I have 2 family members, 2 brothers who are living and working overseas. 10% of our population are overseas. We are so proud of our migrant workers that we call them modern day heroes. We recognize their sacrifices. We recognize the difficulties of caring for other people's children when you cannot even hug your own. For every overseas Filipino worker or OFW that had to come home due to the pandemic, more than 1 million of them so far, our government paid for their flights home, the hotel quarantine required, and their travel back to the home province. The other day, President Rodrigo Duterte signed an executive order creating a hospital for migrant workers. Next week, the Senate is expected to pass a bill that will soon become a law, creating a new department specifically for migrant workers. So I can say with pride in my heart that if there's one country where migration is always part of the national conversation, it would be the Philippines. And perhaps for this reason, the Philippines has become one of the global champions of the GCM. Yet, given our long history of migration governance, more than 47 years to this day, there are 2 major areas that we need to enhance: reintegration of our overseas Filipino workers and gender responsiveness. An IOM survey conducted among 8,000 OFW returnees impacted by the COVID-19 virus indicated that female migrant workers returned to the Philippines were more likely to be low paid and were less likely to benefit from the government's repatriation support. In fact, a majority of those who have returned among these female repatriated workers were not able to get their complete compensation package before they were able to return to the Philippines. According to the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, which is a trust fund set up by government for our migrant workers, there were more reported welfare cases for women rather than men in 2020, or during the height of the pandemic. Human anatomy should not get in the way of human rights. Yet in the real world, in small rooms, in dark corners of homes and villas, where foreign female domestic workers live and work, the likelihood of exploitation is higher simply because, number one, the nature of their work, and number two, the fact that they have breasts, not balls. It is against this backdrop that the MPTF funded Bridging Recruitment to Reintegration in Migration Governance. It's such a long title, but I like the shorter version. It's Bridge, or the Bridge program, was launched as a joint program among IOM, ILO, and UN Women in partnership with the Department of Foreign Affairs, licensed recruitment agencies, and NGOs such as the Ople Center, to which I belong. Bridge is supporting Philippine migration governance actors in implementing Objectives 6 and 21 of the GCM, using a gender-responsive, evidence-based, and whole-of-society approach. Let me give 3 ways that Bridge is working towards this goal. First, promoting better use of gender disaggregated data to inform policies and programs. This aligns with the first objective of the GCM, which is to collect and utilize accurate and disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies. We cannot help women migrants meet their specific needs if we do not even know what those needs are. As Rex Barona from ILO said, Philippine migration is a very gendered phenomenon. Therefore, it is not acceptable that our responses are generic. They have to be gender responsive. Bridge aims to help address some of these gaps through a mapping and gender assessment of data collection and management practices, and training personnel of migration agencies to strengthen their data visualization and analysis skills. It will provide examples of how gender considerations can be mainstreamed in migration research by supporting a Yale University study on the impact of migration on educational outcomes of children. Number 2, promoting more gender-responsive reintegration pathways. The Bridge program is undertaking a comprehensive mapping and gender assessment of existing reintegration programs in order to identify where the gaps are and draw the appropriate interventions. We are fortunate that a draft national action plan for reintegration is in the works to make reintegration support more relevant and accessible to migrants, especially women, including survivors of abuse, violence, and harassment. Bridge will also pilot a reintegration program linked to the future of work. This is called the Reintegrating Women through IT, Reskilling, and Education, another long name, or Rewired. Rewired aims to support women migrant returnees in finding work in the digital sector. So you can imagine our Muslim women who have been repatriated from the Middle East would now be able to leave behind their analog existence and enter the digital world and be competitive in digital work. So it also supports the setting up of a migrant resource center to deliver gender-responsive services for OFWs and their families. Third, by promoting fair and ethical recruitment, especially for women migrants. We are excited in the Philippines because the new law that is about to be enacted, hopefully this year or early next year, bears a definition of ethical recruitment, which will be the first in Philippine history. We believe that fair and ethical recruitment is gender responsive, women migrants, especially our domestic workers, should not feel that they owe a huge debt of gratitude to their recruiters and employers, to the point of turning a blind eye to exploitation and saying yes to the denigration of their dignity and identity. In the Philippines, the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration is looking into incentives that can be provided to fair and ethical recruiters, another first. We thank the majority of UN member states for having adopted the GCM in 2018 because by doing so, we were able to reach this milestone. Bridge aims to help recruitment policies and practices in the Philippines with GCM and other global standards, including by advocating the adoption of ILO Convention 181 to prohibit private recruitment agencies from charging recruitment fees from migrant workers. During this era of COVID-19, we need to assert gender responsiveness even more. Because there's always this problem wherein people do ask, gender responsiveness, what does it mean? Is it a myth or is it the norm? I think the answer, like beauty, lies in the eyes of the beholder. Our challenge collectively is to make that phrase felt more, heard more, understood more by as many workers, governments, employers, and stakeholders as possible. The Bridge program must live up to its name. And from the abstract of several project documents, come to life in the form of as many empowered migrants and families of migrants as possible. As long as we don't stop making this world a fair, safe, and peaceful one for all, then the time will come when we don't even have to talk about gender. Because equality will not rely on who has the breast and who has the balls. Equality will be for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful intervention. Absolutely. Human anatomy, no location, no migration status. None of this should get in the way of human rights. Thank you so much, Ms. Susan Otte. So we have come to the end of our speakers in the three topics. I would like to open up to the floor. Please note that despite what I said before, it is really not just about question and answers, but really we would like to use this as a platform for comments, any suggestions on the fund, where it is, the way forward. As the Director General had mentioned, we would like to take your inputs and really reflect these next week when we meet as steering committee in our biannual meeting. So please, the floor is open. I would like to actually first call upon Madame Marie-Arlette Calotti. She's a senator from France representing the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. Madame, you have the floor. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à toutes et tous.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you, to all the participants. I send you greetings from Marseille, from the south of France. I wanted to tell you all that it's a great pleasure for me to talk to you as a French MP, member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, where I have responsibilities as migration rapporteur. I would like to thank the organizers and the United Nations Network for giving the floor to us MPs, elected politicians, and to bring our voice to the table of those exchanges. It is very important because indeed we're coming close to the review of the GCM that will be held in 2021 in New York. Please allow me to tell you about migration from the Mediterranean standpoint. As you know, the Mediterranean region is particularly vulnerable. It is vulnerable to migratory crisis. All the Mediterranean countries are countries of origin, transit countries, or destination countries, and sometimes the three at the same time. And most of MPs can no longer bear to witness the drowning of so many migrants in the Mediterranean Sea, whether they are in search of political asylum or of better living conditions. More than 1,300 migrants have died in the Mediterranean during the last year, since the 31st of January. And 2021 is a record year in that regard, the worst one of the last 3 years. So it is a terrible proof of the failure of our migratory policies. But our priority should be to save lives. It is recalled in Article 8 of the Global Compact. So these migratory crises are caused by political instability, economic instability in the Near East, in the countries in the Mediterranean basin, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel. But as you know, there is a very strong influence of population growth and environmental factors which are decisive in pushing these people to take risks. They are trying to escape from misery. A large part of the African territory is under hydric stress. They depend on the seasonal rain to eat for their farming activities, and the lack of rainfall generates very high tensions around natural resources. It causes the drift from land towards cities, and the cities are not always equipped to meet the needs of these people. And it can also exacerbate political, ethnic, religious tensions and encourage the population to take all possible risks, endangering thus the lives of women and children, among others. And it is also a fantastic breeding ground for terrorism. Since 2008, when the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean held its Parliamentary Assembly in Monaco, has been calling for the recognition of the status of environmental refugee. And we want to repeat here solemnly and in front of you all this call. We want a status of environmental refugee recognized by international law. We are very much inspired by the different countries that have been emerging all over the world, and we support this mechanism, which involves the states, but also the different partners of civil societies, and engages them in a joint work with a view to developing inclusive solutions for the migrants. There is hope. I think there is hope, and we're really expressing the strong wish that these projects in the Mediterranean region should see the light of day and be financed as soon as possible. There is so much to do in our region too. And to conclude, I'd like to say that we are looking forward to taking part next to you all to the forthcoming consultations in the framework of the review forum of the GCM. These exchanges are very enriching, and they will further feed into our debate within our political assembly. Thank you very much to you all for allowing me to participate. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madame, for that intervention. The next few speakers, and apologies if I don't get them in the right order because I'm just looking at the hands currently. We have Mr. Richard Taylor from the UK. We have a intervention request from the Philippines. I believe it would be Ambassador Garcia. And I believe there was also a request from Mr. Christoph Thomas. So those three, as I see, are the ones that have their hands up currently. Apologies if I missed anybody. Please also write on the chat as well. So first, the UK, then the Philippines, and then Mr. Christoph, please. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Reiko. Good morning, colleagues from London. Thank you to all the panelists for really excellent and interesting interventions. I just wanted to add the UK's voice to those of Germany and Mexico as the other donor member of the steering committee at the moment. We are, sorry, excuse me. and really just add our voice of support to what the fund has been doing. I think in common with most donors at the moment, we are facing a huge amount of pressure on limited funds. We want to support the GCM actively, but at the same time, we are trying to prioritize. And I think in that context, a mechanism like the GCM the MPTF is an excellent option. Instead of trying to do something limited with bilateral mechanisms, we are able to plug into a mechanism that magnifies our influence, magnifies our resources, and also gives us access to an alliance of stakeholders and a platform for policy dialogue, which we otherwise wouldn't have. As the Director General says, there are 9 projects currently approved, which I think has been an excellent joint endeavour over the last 2 years. Next Tuesday at the Steering Committee, we hope to approve more, and we will end this year in a very strong position. In recognition of that, the UK has been able to increase its contribution. Originally, we had pledged $4 million over the first 3-year period. We're now nearly at $5 million. And I would encourage any other donors who are looking to support the GCM to consider this as an option as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. May I give the floor to Ambassador Garcia, please?
Good morning. Yeah, thank you, Chair, for giving the Philippines an opportunity to make an intervention at this point. Let me thank DG Victorino, the UN Network, the FMU for making these arrangements, and of course, you yourself, Reiko, for keeping everything flowing so well. The Philippines is a GCM champion country, a beneficiary, and for this year, a donor to the Migration and MPTF. So you do not need to sell the Philippines on this advocacy. In our system, once a voluntary commitment to a program has been established, there is a reasonable expectation that the contribution will be annual and regular, so we hope to increase these contributions over time. On the 3 themes of this plenary, I have some points I would like to make for each segment, if you will allow me. On theme 1, climate change, GCM Objective 2 calls on all sectors to minimize the adverse drivers and structural factors that compel people to leave their country of origin. Climate change has clearly been a driver of migration, in addition to job loss, peace and order, demographic imbalances, environmental degradation, among others. There is, we hope, an emerging consensus on the need to have a migration lens to adaptation strategies to climate change. In the lead up to COP26, there was a drumbeat that linked migration and climate change in a very negative way. Some political leaders have linked the impacts of increased temperature and the difficult political situations arising from food shortage, desertification, habitat loss, and huge movements of peoples to the historic fall of civilizations that ushered in the so-called Dark Ages. I can appreciate the graphic description to highlight the dire situation humanity faces due to climate change, but as a country of origin for migrants, the Philippines struggles with the link being made between migrants and the Dark Ages, when we will all know that migration can be a positive contributor to development. With the conclusion of the COP26, is there a way we can work together to make sure that these negative narratives and doomsday scenarios can be reframed? Theme 2, engagement with local authorities. Thank you for sharing the experience of Mexico and the Mayor's Migration Council. Indeed, it does take a city to implement GCM because in most cases, when we talk about host countries, we really mean host cities. This means the task of ensuring that migrants contribute positively to society relies on the engagement of local government and local populations. The Philippine Bridge Project under thematic area 4 on return migration is a great example of this. And with Ms. Ople as the lead, I am sure we will have good outcomes to report at the IMRF. Finally, theme 3 on gender responsiveness. Thank you to Ms. Ferro of the UNFPA and Ms. Susan Ople of the Ople Policy Center and Training Institute. Ms. Ople is well known and respected in the Philippine Foreign Ministry. Her father, Secretary Blas Ople, was the Secretary of Foreign Affairs and my former boss. He was a true statesman and champion for the migrant worker. So much of our migration governance architecture was set up during his term as head of the Department of Labor and Employment. So it is wonderful to see his legacy live on through the important work of Ms. Ople as head of the Policy Center and Training Institute. As to our question, indeed, if migration is gendered, the responses should not be gender blind. The current metrics used by the MPTF for considering projects include gender markers and a human rights marker among its criteria. How else can the fund advocate for a gender perspective in all policies in the context of the GCM? Thanks. That's all for now. I hand it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those reflections. Very insightful. I just actually just wanted to reiterate what you mentioned about the positive narrative between the linkage of climate change, environment degradation, and migration, because there is actually the Regional Pacific Pipeline Project in the fund, which looks at labor migration as a climate change adaptation and resilience strategy. So there are interventions out there that we can support and we can really use as good examples throughout the world and leading up to the IMRF. So I just wanted to point that out. It has been mentioned by the coordinator, but I wanted to reiterate. Next, I believe we have Mr. Christoph Thomas. Please, sir, go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Sweden. And thank you to IOM, DG Vitorino, and the UN Network for all your work. The International Migration Review Forum in May next year will be a major event at high level within the UN system, involving not only governments, but also civil society and a range of other stakeholders. We should all seize this opportunity to report on GCM implementation and think ahead for the next 4 years. It is of great value that the GCM has adopted a 360-degree perspective with a whole of government and whole of society approach, promoting broad multi-stakeholder partnerships. We also welcome the inclusion of topical issues such as the impact of the COVID pandemic and climate-induced migration, and cross-cutting issues such as gender and the role of local authorities. We are grateful for the role played by the UN Network on Migration and the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund. Sweden is one of the countries who have provided support. In our case, it's around US 300,000 in 2020 and US 540,000 in 2021. Our contribution aims to strengthen the capacities for migration management and development-oriented cooperation in third countries. We encourage other states to contribute to the fund. It could also be useful if the network encouraged more regional cooperation besides focusing on national implementation of the GCM. We also welcome the dedication of the 27 or so GCM champion countries, which form a group in the forefront of GCM implementation. Looking for good practices of cooperation could be rewarding, especially together with those governments. And finally, we hope that the composition of this group of countries may expand further and become more geographically balanced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas, for that intervention. I currently don't have anybody waiting, so I would like to invite again from the floor if anybody would like to provide comments or interventions, just thoughts about how they would like to see the fund being implemented, the approaches that we take, also leading up to the IMRF next year. And if there are any speakers actually that may want to come in and maybe respond to some of the comments that we just received, or maybe add some additional inputs, the floor would be open. Very quiet. I do have Atlee Solberg. Ms. Atlee, please go ahead.
Thank you, Reiko. I saw also that Irene Biontine from the German government took the floor, so maybe let her go first.
Apologies, I didn't see that. Yes, Irene. Please, Irene, please go ahead. Thank you. And thank you, Atli.
Thank you very much. I would just like to use this opportunity to draw the attention also to a recent White House report from October, which recommends the Migration Trust Fund as an instrument to address aspects of climate change, humanitarian assistance and development. This is very encouraging, and I hope it will help us to rally more supporters to the trust fund. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Irene. Definitely. Thank you for bringing that up again. If Atli, we would like to speak, please go ahead.
Thank you, Reiko. I wanted to comment on the intervention by Ambassador Evans, the Philippines, and I think that's extremely important, the issue about the narrative and what is the story we are telling around climate change. I think it's a very difficult balancing act. On one side, the adverse effect of climate change is going to increase risk across all sectors, and it's going to affect everyone working on these issues. But we also have to not pitch that against human mobility and under communicate the development potential of human mobility and migration. And I think the balancing act is there, and we have to be careful about numbers, projections, and the narrative. I could not agree more than with Ambassador Evans on this. But this also drives the message around the importance of data and evidence, and that how we manage the data and evidence out there around risk. So we need to get our heads around the new risk landscape, and the COVID-19 added another layer. But we also need to get our heads around the mobility landscape. And I think that was why we partner in the EGAD program, wanted to highlight how much we are working on data and evidence to map the risk landscape. And I also congratulate the Multi-Partner Trust Fund for having trust in such a strong component on risk modeling and risk understanding. And that's probably an area where we need to scale up. The second point, perhaps, which is related to what Ambassador Evans said, is that this conversation will now happen across many fora. It will happen, as you saw in the Conference of the Parties of the Framework Convention in Glasgow. So mobility and displacement and migration will be discussed within climate change negotiation. We assume that it will be discussed next year in the International Migration Review Forum, and it's also increasingly discussed in fora around human rights, fora on disaster risk reduction. So how do we bring those conversations together in a coherent narrative? And that's what I think also I congratulate the Multi-Partner Trust Fund for. You trust in the EGAD program, because you have brought together quite a few actors that work on these issues, both within the EGAD structure and the Secretariat and ICPAC, but also you have brought together a great range of UN agencies that can speak to these different areas. My last point would be the same. If similar regional approaches are now in pipeline in the Pacific, let's think about other areas where you see this very complex and complicated risk landscape, whether it's in Central America, whether it's Central Asia, whether it's in Southeast Asia, South Asia. Let's try to scale up our efforts to bring in multi-stakeholder program intervention and trying to get our heads around issues that are difficult: climate change, human rights, disaster risk reduction, displacement, humanitarian assistance, and so on. So thank you so much for letting me having a new pitch on some arguments.
Thank you so much. And absolutely, the multi-stakeholder, cross-cutting issues, it is just so critical. And this is also why with the EGAD program, we're very proud to have all of these actors working together towards the program. Okay, I am just sorry, I'm just going to double check on the chat function if there is anybody who still would like to speak. Sorry, it's just sort of 3 screens all at once kind of situation here. Okay. What I would like to do then, actually, is to call upon the closing speaker, who is Ms. Jennifer Topping, who will be closing our session and providing an overview from the UNDP Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office perspective. So if I believe you're here, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Reiko, and thank you to all of the leadership team of this fund, from DG Vitorino, the steering committee members, the partners here present, the UN network, and really the fund secretariat management team, yourself and Philippe, for steering this multi-stakeholder fund and effort and this consultation. It's really a great illustration of many of the things that partners have been talking about over these last couple of hours today, but the snapshot of really what this represents is really impressive, and we're delighted to be part of this overall effort. Thanks for the opportunity to provide some closing remarks. There's been some really excellent interventions and observations, and I think these really fruitful discussions and the messages and discussions that we've had today will feed very effectively the reflections of the steering committee on the strategic priorities when it meets next Tuesday, as others have said. As you've introduced, my name is Jennifer Topping, and I am the executive coordinator of the Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office of UN in New York, and we're delighted to have served as the trustee and the administrative agent for this fund and this partnership since the outset. And I'd really take this opportunity just to maybe underscore a couple of the important takeaways from the discussion today, not by way of summarizing, of course, the whole thing, but a couple of points to underscore and a couple of points to link those to the performance of the fund and the forward look over time from where we sit as the trustee. So I think on a couple of reflections on messages and comments that participants have made that are really important to take away. I think one is that set of comments that have been underscored on the alignment of the fund, the Multi-Partner Trust Fund, with the principles, the guiding principles of the GCM. And that was illustrated by many partners during this discussion, but particularly in areas on gender responsiveness, on the whole of government approaches, but also as it relates to other more innovative links to GCM principles, like the human rights marker in the projects funded by the fund. So I think recognition and acknowledgement and continuing to work on those areas is a really big asset and an important takeaway. Maybe the second one on to flag that I heard a number of times is the link, of course, between migration and other really important global issues around climate, around health in the context of the pandemic. And it really underscores the relevance of the migration MPTF in addressing these critical challenges through its program, through its vision, and then through its programming. And I think those are really important demonstrations of one of the assets of this approach. Its inclusion, its multi-stakeholder nature, as many have said already, its amplification of a partnership effort, but also its flexibility and relevance as emerging topics come up that have an important migration dimension, that the fund has proven that it can link and respond and address those important principles from the compact. Maybe a few other short final remarks related to some of the things we see in our role as the trustee of the fund, since we serve as trustee for a very wide range of UN-hosted multi-stakeholder funds, multi-partner trust funds, that it provides an advantage of looking across good practice and across design, across performance, on many of these sorts of instruments. So a few reflections about the fund in relation to standard practice and good practice, and really setting the trend and raising a bar on these points. First would be to confirm that from where we sit as trustee of the fund, I can really give that assurance that the fund, this Migration MPTF, rests on a very strong design foundation. And I think many of the comments here have been illustrations of that. But both its structure, the way it's been designed, but the way it's operated provides a bit of a proof of concept over the last couple of years. And it really meets these standards that member states and the UN family and partners have set for this type of approach and instrument. As everyone knows here, the buy-in to this kind of a multi-stakeholder approach is an important first step, but structuring really properly, efficiently, and transparently that partnership and the fund so it functions and meets the trust of all the partners is really the quality metric that we're always after. And this fund has done a very good job of maintaining on and exceeding those standards in a transparent way with risk management features as others have mentioned, the decision-making approaches, the consensus-based decision-making approaches held transparently and efficiently, the programming cycles, the pre-approved pipeline and identified projects allows that forward look on programming. And there are many more. There are just important design features that are parts of success and quality over time. But from our experience, this design structure and operation that the Migration MPTF has put in place is a really important success factor and augurs well for the performance of the fund over time. Second, I would say on the features of the fund that others have mentioned, and I know DG Vitorino mentioned it in his opening remarks, is the success factor that has to do with capitalization. The fund, as we know, has mobilized over $27 million to date, which puts it in a growing and healthy financial situation, and with a broad base of partners and contributing stakeholders. As we know, this is a huge agenda, the fund's agenda to support its role with the GCM, in support of the GCM, and looking ahead to next year. So to really fulfill that potential of the ask and the mandate and deliver on its objectives that member states have assigned, it does need to get even to greater scale, both in volume and in the base of participants. So the $70 million target that has been indicated by the time of the International Review Forum next year is ambitious, but not out of the park ambitious for the nature and the ambition of the migration compact and the review. So that kind of step up and the co-championship and the co-creation of the path to that capitalization is something that we all share in a multi-stakeholder engagement, but it is an important one for success over time to continue to invest in the success of what we've all been talking about. A third point, in a way, is a little bit on the side of the fund as it relates to migration, but it's more this approach and the fund and its performance as it relates to the complementary and important goal of this sort of approach to flexible and quality funding in the context of UN reform. And as important partners, member states to the UN, I know we're all engaged and active on this front too, but I do want to underscore that in addition to the substantive points and outcomes and features of the fund, that this approach is a very distinctly reform sensitive and reform friendly instrument, because it really does provide that coherence, that synergy, that coordination across the family of the UN with its partners and member states, and serves that catalytic instrument to leverage multi-stakeholder partnerships. And then on the counterfactual, to reduce the kind of fragmentation and smaller projectized type of funding that adds transactions and doesn't amplify or magnify in the way that our colleague from the UK was mentioning in the same way. So this not only has that impact in the substantive space of the fund, but it has that impact in the performance and the reform agenda of the UN, and makes a very important contribution in that regard. So Reiko, those are a few closing observations, both related to some of the important takeaways and comments that have been made so far, and from the point of view of how the MPTF itself is helping to advance the agenda in its qualitative forms. And I really thank you for the opportunity to reflect. I'm really happy to be with you. Look forward to next week, also with the steering committee meeting, but really to congratulate all of the partners here, because it does take a village, as we say, and takes a broad-based partnership to deliver on this agenda, but the strength of it really is evident, and congratulations and thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely closing remarks. And with that, we are going to be closing the session. I'd like to thank all the speakers, Director General, Ms. Topping, for your interventions, as well as all our partners who have commented from the floor. We would definitely like to take all of these inputs and reflect them back to the steering committee, and definitely take forward some of the recommendations and comments for our work, upcoming work and in future. So with that, this session will be closing. I would like to also remind everybody that after this session, there will be the last session starting at 3 p.m. Geneva time, looking at forward to the IMRF. It'll be on the same channel as this, so you can either keep it open or you can reconnect. But it will start at 3 p.m. Central European time, and we would love to have you there as well. So thank you very much, speakers, everybody. I hope that people are not too hungry and you can all go for lunch now. Thank you, and see you maybe next year. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Reiko.